Yeah, no, totally.
So real quick, if you could go ahead and just give a little description about yourself, and then kind of what led us to having this conversation, because with the time sensitivity of it, I know how some people are, they'll listen to the first few minutes. And so if those are valuable minutes, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally,
you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
Cool. So
absolutely.
Matt.
Yeah. So Matt Maxwell, I'm from South Carolina. I should start off though by saying we got connected because I am working for Safe Place International, where we're helping queer refugees, LGBTQI plus refugees, go through a sort of transformation process and taking kind of from a place of vulnerability and victimhood to being leaders in community or regional and global movements. And you found me through our upcoming DC October event on October 11th, kind of our coming out day to the DC.
So that's kind of like your debut. This is like your debut event?
Like on the East Coast, we mostly we're incorporated in like California. So most of our supporters, donors, partners have been over there, even though, again, most of our work is in Africa and Southern Europe.
Yeah.
But now we're expanding. We've been through, I've been with the organization for almost a year now, and which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. My first, big job out of law school. And
I also feel like a year is about when you start to kind of get into the swing of things.
Exactly,
up until that point, you're just kind of like, you're trying to learn things and like.
Yeah. Because I think coming into these spaces, especially with human rights, there's a concept of like, you come in so gung-ho, you come in with innovation and passion, especially as someone straight out of school.
Sorry, I'm going to turn my phone off real quick. I forgot that. I do not want it interrupting us.
Yeah. And you come out of school with all of this passion and you want to just like hit the ground running, but you have to learn about the other stakeholders and what's already happening on the ground. You also have to learn your own organization.
Yeah.
And so kind of like, this time last year, we went to a conference, tried to have we had a happy hour that was fine, right? Like we met some really great people.
Okay.
But then we tried to have our own separate, kind of morning event. And it was hardly anyone, right? Because we hadn't established ourselves in DC.
Gotcha.
It was just personal friends we had made at the conference. And I will say very few. But now we're going into this with 19 days left before the event.
Yeah.
And we've already we have reached 50 people signed up. And that's
Nice.
with weeks ahead of schedule.
Nice.
So definitely there's been an evolution, and our organization's name, again, Safe Place International, has been in more mouths than it was this time last year.
Question about the event. So it's $50 to register, right?
Yep. It is.
I've been to some events where, you can come and participate in a lot of things. I love going to conventions, anime conventions where people cosplay and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course.
Oh my gosh, I love it. It's one of my first loves when it comes to anything like video, photo, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, love to talk to you about anime.
Oh my gosh, man! I'm considering a completely separate anime podcast.
Just pivot to the anime.
Yeah, because I was like, if I try doing it during this, there's going to be way too many anime episodes, and I'm like, I may need to make its own little thing. But you pay tickets, and that allows you to go into Artist Alley, to buy merch, to go to different panels, all that kind of stuff. However, there are areas kind of all around that even if you didn't buy a ticket, you can still hang outside. You can go into the main lobby area and hang out, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What does registering for this event get you? And is it something that kind of people can come and congregate around the area and do kind of just exterior celebrations, that kind of thing?
Yeah. We tried to make it a really fair price and accessible price for any group, especially, in the area that we're working for and, working in. We don't want to be exclusion. We don't want to exclude anyone if we can help it. But at the essence, it is a fundraiser and we have to be able to cover costs.
Most definitely.
Because we don't want to go in the red, right? So we have to, it's just, especially, these are, again, kind of the nuances of coming into this field and finding out LGBTQIA plus events. Yeah. And just for the ease of conversation, I use the word queer just because it's, one, easier to say and quicker. Yeah. But just also academically, historically, I do understand the context. And so I will use queer. I hope that doesn't offend any listeners, because it's definitely a Gen Z kind of split with that. We can talk about that later. But
most definitely. And that's something I was going to get in with you too, navigating the waters.
Exactly. And part of navigating the waters for events, my favorite aspect, and maybe, some of the harsher realities of working in the space, is that queer events typically will have open bar. And so I have to be able to cover that open bar. And listen, I'm not opposed to it. So I'm excited about having open bar. But we also have some food donations and things like that. And just at the end of the day, have to cover costs. So,
So this event coming out DC 2022, it's coming out day. And so from an outside perspective, I imagine that, and you've said it before, but this is just, you're creating an environment for people to come and be authentic in a way that they might not feel comfortable doing in other places.
Sure.
And that's kind of like the big draw to it. Are there any sort of like, speakers, or is there any sort of, what are all the events going on? Or is it just more of like a gathering? Hey, come gather here. We call
it's more of a gathering event. And I'll tell you what, with National Coming Out Day, it was just like the perfect backdrop for us. Right. So one, it is our coming out to the DC community. And when we say DC community, of course, that means like my friends and our host committee's friends, but it also means like the stakeholders, right?
Gotcha.
Government agencies, partner organizations, and just funding institutions, hopefully, right? Like that's always the dream. But with with this celebration specifically, we're here to kind of spotlight our community members. And when I say that, I mean, LGBTQIA plus refugees and asylum seekers who were primarily located in Africa. There's a huge gap in not just, resources between the West and Africa, but it's also a matter of, difficulty in just knowing what's out there, and knowing that people, like a lot of people don't know that there's this intersection of refugee and queer identity that hardly anyone is focusing on, that really no funding is going to, because the primary focus again has been on this sort of, it's either there's LGBTQIA plus funding or there's refugee funding. And sometimes they'll have like a little bit of a cutout for one of the, that intersection, but there's not really that kind of focus. But these are the most vulnerable in society often.
Can you describe to me a little bit about how, if you have LGBTQI plus and refugee, I guess, how is it hard for them to get any sort of assistance if there's refugee and there's LGBTQIA plus assistance? Is it because they are a combination of both that makes it difficult? Can they kind of like, fall into one or the other in order to get more assistance?
No, I mean, so the reality that our community is experiencing is that, and this also depends on how they leave, right? So there are people who are displaced because of war or economic hardship. And, they'll come often as refugees and then, come out and identify as, queer when they're comfortable doing so. But more often what we're seeing, right, where we're at the front lines of queer resettlement are people who are running away and trying to escape from, retribution for coming out. Right. So and when they do so, they're coming kind of like because they could not, what we often say is pass as straight, right? Like passing is a long term with lots of history. But really the sort of folks that we're working with are like, for instance, the trans community or what some would have dubbed as like hyper, like, or, I guess if feminine men, or, gay men, or really like masked lesbians, as some would say. And like hiding is not an option for them. Living authentically is not like a matter of like a choice sometimes. Like they are born very proud and very queer. And that's
very hard to not live as yourself. Exactly. It's exhausting.
And so what happens, which is always really surprising, what really just blew my mind when I came into this space was that the disparity of, these folks trying to seek a better life and just want, to live a regular life and be authentic, right? But they
So
move.
much to ask for, right?
Yeah, exactly. but they move and they think they're gonna say move to Greece and it's gonna be a better life.
Yeah.
But of course they're being resettled with people from around where they're from, right? They're moving.
The people they're trying to get away from.
Exactly. They're moving into the same traditionalist mindset, but far, like, sometimes even more vulnerable, because they don't have any support system.
Yeah. They're in a whole new place. And it's like, you try to get out of, like you said, like a lot of displacement from Africa. Let me go to this place to feel safe. And now they kind of move you into little Africa.
No, exactly.
And you're in a whole new place. Yeah, that can be scary. I try to, a lot of what I'm trying to do is find common ground. And so when I hear something like that, I try to think of the times in my life where I've been in a situation where I am completely vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a few times in my life. I remember one time I was making this trip down to Paraguay.
Yeah.
I had to make this layover in Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
And the people I knew down in Paraguay were like, no, you don't need a visa. You don't need a visa. I'm an idiot. I don't know any better. Right. So I'm like, okay.
I've been there.
Okay, sure. I don't need a visa. All right. I'm just going to fly down to Paraguay. Super easy. I get to Argentina and they're like, yeah, you definitely need a visa to get into Paraguay. And so the options were to either fly back to America, get a visa, or to go into downtown Buenos Aires and you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
I don't know a word of Spanish, and I don't even want to attempt it to, fear of sounding like a complete idiot, proving to them I don't know. And so, I felt very alien in that area. So, so the desperation I can imagine one would feel if they leave their home seeking safety just to get put into another unsafe. And now, like you said, now they have zero support.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Well, I mean, so what often happens in that kind of situation, right, is that you would try to find someone who's from similar background, right? You would try to find the Americans or at least someone who could speak English, right? But for our community, when they're moving, what they're coming in contact with, again, is that traditionalist mindset. So they can't even turn to the very support systems that other refugees are turning to. And when we say that they are being excluded from like the conventional routes and resources, it can be as like case by case basis as, oh, I tried to go into the food line to get my groceries or use my card, but I was chased out because I'm obviously trans or I'm obviously gay and lesbian or non-binary. Like, I'm being chased out because I'm already being identified, right? A lot of folks are being put in houses with the very people they're trying to escape or the shelters. Like, so one of my close friends that I've gotten connected with through our kind of network of community members, he crossed from Cameroon, went across Africa, like sometimes by foot, by car, but never by plane. And came by boat to Greece and like landed on the islands and was put into a shelter with, just generally like, right, with men. Yeah. And I mean, yes, he identifies as a man, but at first they were like, oh, you're just like really quiet and really sweet. Yeah. Wait, no, I know your cousin. He told me that you left because you're gay. Yeah. And, my friend, he's dealt with a lot of trauma and was abused in that shelter, targeted for 6 months without any relief until he could finally come into Athens. And again, I've lived in Athens for a bit and I do enjoy it, but again, it's not a gay haven, right? It's not the place to be, especially if you're a person of color and queer. Yeah. There's always, and a refugee, right? So like there are these other levels that we often call like double marginalization, but it's far more accurate to say triple or quadruple marginalization. How much of what y'all are doing is in response to people trying to seek asylum in America versus y'all are trying to say to the world, hey, listen, stop going to Greece, stop going here, stop going there, like come here, there are resources. Yeah, well, our team, I should say, is primarily people of color, LGBTQI plus refugees, right? Like I'll say for the viewer, I am white and I'm a white guy from America filled with privilege. And so it's really just been an honor to be on this team because I'm just constantly like learning from them.
You learn so much,
right? About the insight of like, I say like, oh, can we do like this event? Or like when you're talking, can you bring this up? And they're just like, Matt, like love the idea. However, no.
Yeah.
And they're so respectful in teaching me these things. And like, of course, there's just, just basic like cultural gaps that, any kind of like, that's always going to exist in any organization, especially when they're international. But there's even more like, just more fundamental kind of misunderstandings or just things that they're really being patient with. Yeah. But I am forgetting where I was going with this.
No, it's good. It's absolutely, because this is going to be a whole fluid thing. And I can guarantee you this, right? At some point, we're going to be talking about something. And that's what I was talking about. Yeah. That kind of thing right there. Yeah. But I agree with you. I know some people and they love to travel. And trust, if I had the money, I would absolutely travel too. I'd be traveling all the time. But as far as learning more about the world, and there's a lot to learn by traveling and going to a place. Absolutely. But you can learn so much more from other people. Because you're right. I've been in situations where I'll put my 2 cents in and someone says, actually, this is a different way that same thing is seen. And it's very eye-opening. If you're willing to listen and try to understand something that, when I was talking to Brea, I had to just really just kind of like, sit there wide-eyed and wide-eared and just, I think some people have a hard time accepting just the things that someone is saying. Yeah. There's a lot of conflict because it's like, that doesn't match my experience. Yeah. And that can be very, very tough for people to do. And I think, that's where a lot of conflict comes in,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I finally do remember what I was saying.
There it is. Boom.
Previously. Yeah, exactly. Is that, so our work again is primarily in Africa. And your question is like, are we helping with the resettlement side? Are we helping like at the forefront there? Yeah. Right. What we're doing, we do work with some of our community members who have resettled in the United States, but resettlement is not our focus really. We are trying to build community in Africa so that whether they're a displaced person or, a queer person living in their home country just facing discrimination and prejudice, we're trying to, put them in a position of power and confidence to kind of create the change they want to see, right? Yeah. We've seen just incredible outcomes from that.
No one wants to leave home.
No one wants to leave home. No. Like, of course not. Like, I think often the media or like, the communication aspect of refugees is pointed at either, oh, look at these tragic characters who are having to move over here and they're just refugees, or like, oh my God, look at these illegal immigrants coming. Like, we don't want them. Yeah. And both of them are just incredibly unfair. And I'll say, the latter is extremely unfair and dehumanizing. But the one of the things to realize is that these folks aren't just refugees, right? Like they are not just the simple adjective of refugee, right?
We love making simple definitions, right?
Exactly. Like it's the human nature to categorize because it's easier to other things than to understand. Yeah. And, when I got to know this community, because I love this job, right? I didn't go the conventional legal route. No. I chose to be the development director of a startup nonprofit, basically. Yeah. And what's been beautiful is like getting to know the community and sometimes just being able to sit in a meeting and say like, I love what I saw on Netflix. And they're just like, I love that actor. I love that actress. Oh, I love that video game. Of course I love partying. Like, do you know this dance? This dance? It's just like so humanizing to see the more dynamic side of each of these people. And so like, with the recent like news with the whole like Martha Vineyard thing it's just tragic because I can only imagine like
what's going on there. So forgive my ignorance. No. I used to trust when I used to listen to news podcasts on the way home, on the way to work, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But forgive, like it just became too depressing for me. So Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah. So basically what happened is that, there's ongoing migrant crisis at the border.
Gotcha.
DeSantis, governor of Florida, basically worked with Texas. I don't know how well, so I might be misstating, but they basically flew migrants at the Texan border up to Martha's Vineyard. And, you know, the whole
using
scheme
them as
of it,
pawns, kind of like, hey, here's
the scheme of the whole thing was like, you know, these rich white people, they're fine with, you know, talking about the issues, but as soon as it's on their front doorstep, they don't care.
Yeah.
And it was terrible because also they told the migrants that they were going to other places or that they would be resettled. Instead, they show up day one with just like, you know, we were told to be here, right in the middle of the summer. And what's kind of, I mean, total like blowback into DeSantis's face is that the Martha Vineyard community like takes a stand and they're just like, we're going to house them. Like here, take the bed, take the couch, take all of these things. Like kids in their AP Spanish class were going down to help translate. Like it's like idyllic kind of community wrapping around. Yeah. But you know, and as someone who works in the space, I can't not also say that this kind of feeds the white savior complex of like the rich liberal population. Yeah. As though they were like, oh yes, like we're going to prove to the damn Republicans, but
so their intentions might not be entirely pure.
Oh, I'm sure that in their minds that it probably is pure, but of course, like this goes to a greater systemic issue from my eyes, right? Because I'm working in this field, like much more like micro macro kind of relationship. Yeah. But to me, I'm just like, well, yes. So the white people are playing pawns. Like Republicans are kind of getting their messaging across that they wanted to, and so are the white liberals who are saying like, we're not so bad. You guys are the bad ones, and we will do what we can. Like, I mean, but basically, what we need to get back to is like, what's the actual experience of this community, of the refugee community broadly? Is that they got on a plane because they were told that they were going to have a better life in the United States because they're all of them that came. We're doing so legally, right? These were the legal migrants.
The ones that are doing things they're supposed to do.
Which is
which everyone says, if they just come over legally,
Exactly. And it's just like, I can't imagine what they're going through because, they're just like, okay, we'll get on this plane and I can build my life in America. And they're just like, okay, well, so now I'm sleeping on the floor of the couch. I mean, it's nice at Martha's Vineyard or whatever, but I'm not settled. I can't get to work. I can't build my life. I can't settle this for my family. Exactly. And so like when I'm talking about my community, I'm just like, when they're coming, it's so easy to just kind of like get in the line and walk when you're told to walk. And really, I mean, the US has a bad habit of not considering all of the different intersections of what people need. Yeah. So for instance, a lot of our members have been placed in like West Virginia or Texas. And like, both of those places can be better than where they were, like, based on case by case situations. But
this is an area I find particularly critical when people talk about inclusivity and we need representation in certain areas like this is critical because you're right. Me and you, if I haven't said it yet, from South Carolina too. Me and you two white boys from South Carolina, we can say one thing, you know what I mean? But you need someone who's been through the experience,
No, exactly. And, what I've often talked to with friends, but also government officials is just to say, there isn't really an attention to detail when we're, resettling our queer refugee members, right? And that's part of what we're doing is we're not advocating to the government. That's not what we do. We're service oriented, but we had these conversations of saying hey, heads up. Do you know that you just resettled one of our best people who's a great leader? You resettled them in Texas the very week that the anti-trans movement started. And all the backlash to the LGBTQ stuff started going on back in the winter and early spring. It's oh my God, here's this person thinking that they finally made it to a safe haven of just existing, right? They don't want special treatment. They don't even want to be noticed, right? But they've moved over to this other place and already they're just
please don't beat me up.
Exactly. Damn it. I just moved over. And we chuckle about it, but it is so disheartening because I have to have the conversation of saying guys, I don't want you to think that you're about to walk into idyllic, Hollywood movie. Right. There's challenges. I cry when I, came out to my family. I, like have to think about every time I go into a room.
Yeah.
At what point do I have to come out to people? Because that's a reality for queer people, is that we often have to out ourselves, come out of the closet at some point. And it's because so people don't think we're liars. Yeah. Right. And that we're being truthful with them, or that, they want to feel like we don't think they're prejudice, have prejudice against us. My
daughter, she came out. And I said this on the last podcast, but she came out, and I've been trying to, when she did, I respected the moment that it must have been for her. Yeah. But ever since then, if she says something and I get the sense that she's telling me because she feels like she's having let me tell him about this lesbian thing. I just like, okay. Yeah. Me and your mom are going out to dinner later. Like I want her to feel like, to me, the goal is this doesn't have to be a thing. You know what I mean? You're gay. Oh, you're lesbian. Oh, you're okay. Hey, I'm proud of you for being authentic, go for it. Yeah. But, I guess, is that not like a kind of like a great, goal to shoot for, to where it's just like, that's just okay. That's normal. That's normal. It doesn't have to be a coming out thing because, hey, I think, and it's weird, right? Yeah. I think about it all the time. And I guess the majority of the world population is straight. And maybe that's because of countries where it's like it's persecuted. Mm-hmm. Maybe people aren't coming out. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but it'd be really, really cool if at one point it didn't have to be a huge thing.
Well, yeah. And that's the true point. Like, that is the goal, is that, one of my favorite things that I've ever read was this girl talking about her brother who didn't come out. He just brought a boyfriend home. And, and that was the goal of the conversation, was that he had a boyfriend and he was like basically cuddling up over movies. Yeah. And there was no conversation. I mean, that is the goal. And the goal isn't that, we subvert the children and make them all gay. No, like, that's not the queer agenda, right? Like, the true goal is just to be everyone's comfortable being authentic and, being able to enter into a consensual relationship with who they want, right? Without the griff of having to say, like, mom, dad, like, I have a difficult thing to tell you. And it's like, a lot of people are moving right towards that, like, mentality. And, you read about a lot of great stories, but that doesn't mean it's that way for everyone. Like, there are people who grew up thinking, that their parents are super progressive, super accepting, and they get kicked out. Yeah. Right. And it's a matter of like, or, they're basically pressured out because, a parent might say, I support gay rights, just blanket statement. But do they actually, support it in their own home? Like, are they okay seeing that their child is, a lesbian, a trans person, a gay,
Yeah, no, I think it's funny how people can say one thing. I mean, it's cliche, but actions speak louder. I was listening to one podcast, and they brought up trans, and then this person was like, oh yeah, I got a friend who's gay who says trans is homophobic. And they went into this, let's get this right. Okay.
Yeah, processing.
Follow me on this, all right? Yeah. Because I was just like, wait, what? So they were talking about how it's homophobic because, and this is why I'm not saying the podcast or the person who said it, because I don't want to, but anyway, they said it's because, oh, well, now it's like, if I'm a man and I like another man, then I need to transition to a woman or something like that. And I found it interesting because you'd think someone who's in a different demographic, who just is still in some areas, persecuted or judged or thought less of, that they would understand, when someone's just trying to be themselves. And like you said, they're not trying to push it on anyone else. Yeah. It doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. I think I would like to believe, Matt, that most people, understand that there are two extremes, kind of like those Texas Republicans and the Martha's Vineyard, liberals and stuff like that. I'd like to believe that most people aren't thinking that the gays are trying to make us all gay and my kids and stuff like that,
Yeah.
But you're right. It can be really rough because people and people you think who say they're one thing, all of a sudden something comes up and they act in a certain way. They're like, that doesn't quite fit the way you described yourself.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to that idea that we have to categorize ourselves, that we have to have an answer. I mean, I came out as bisexual, and it gives people, like, usually people are like, wait, how does that work? Like, if they only know, like, that trans people exist, that gay people exist, that lesbians exist, and they're just like, well, he's figuring it out. And it's like,
going through a phase.
Sure. I mean, like, it's like I went through a long, back and forth of feeling like I have to figure it out. And we'll just say generally, I have done some searching, and I am still landing at the bisexual space. And I read some articles about this, and, for one, sexuality is constantly like flowing in your life, right? As in, like, you're still trying to figure out what you want, right? And what you enjoy. And I mean, even heterosexual old married couples are like, the same things don't get the spark going like they used to, right?
No,
it changes, and you've got to figure out that stuff. But on a more like human, level, is that I just came to the realization that I don't have to make a decision. Like, if I end up like dating only men for the rest of my life moving forward, that's how it's going to be. And if I'm still attracted to women, the reality is I'm still bisexual, right? And at the same time, like, if people just say, I mean, like, Matt says bi, he works, like, he's only dating men, or he's only dating women, or he only dates trans people, like,
Matt's doing that.
Matt's queer, like that. The more encompassing concept, right? Like, I think we often put ourselves on spectrums because we want to measure things, because it makes the compartmentalization easier. But again, the reality is that these things are ever changing as much as we are in our lives, and we can kind of entrench ourselves in identity, and that's totally okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with someone saying I am like 100% what some would say a platinum gay. Right. Like,
I have not heard that.
Yeah, exactly. And same thing, like, the rest of the community, it's like, you can totally be these things. There's no reason to have to explain yourself to anyone. I mean, I often have to, because like, that's what it means to be, an advocate, an activist, is like, I have to be comfortable having those conversations. Do
you mind if I ask you a little bit about your upcoming,
Sure.
your come up? I say, I'm from South Carolina too. I'm from Charleston. I was raised Southern Baptist. What was it like, and what kind of environment did you come up in? And what was good, what was bad, all that kind of stuff. How was that?
Well, so, I mean, I always preface all these things that I am very proud of my little small town called Bamberg, South Carolina. I do love my hometown, and I was very fortunate to grow up in the community that I did.
Good.
I had a very strong support system. My family's amazing. My school is great, and my friends were really awesome, right? But that doesn't mean that I didn't face, like, prejudice, right? Like, I didn't I didn't feel comfortable coming out to my friends until I was 21. Friends that I had like met in college, who I knew came from, like, my best friend, his mom has like a progressive dinner thing, and it's always the drag community that comes. And I didn't feel comfortable coming out to him until 2 or 3 years into our friendship.
Why?
And it was, I always wondered this, and like, I've sat along and really thought about this, and it's not a fear that you won't be accepted. It's kind of like, you are someone else when you're in a friendship, right? When you're sitting home alone, you have like that mind, that ego, that idea of who you are. But when you're in a friend group, right, or in the office place, you're a different person in that kind of way of like, and to say like, I have kept a whole aspect of myself, but to myself for so long.
Yeah.
It was like I was going to lose a whole part of who I was by like not being the straight guy anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Like, was I going to, and there's also the apprehension. Am I going to lose out on opportunities? Am I going to walk into a group and someone say, well, Matt's my gay friend?
Yeah.
And just be like, well,
like
that's not like, am I don't know. Like, it goes into, it's just like all of these different kind of, influences in that decision.
Yeah.
And a lot of thoughts going over it, like constantly, like, yes, I had like experiences in, in my hometown. Yeah. Right. And I'll keep it super like, vague as I can to respect those people. But it was just generally like kind of difficult, right? Because you're walking to a room and to a lot of people, it was very obvious that I was not straight. And, people called me gay. People called me like, the F slur, like often, like not so often, but like enough to where it's like a rush,
doesn't
right?
take a lot for it to seem often.
Yeah. I mean, like go back to like those days when you're like young and, someone like points out that you're wearing a new shirt or have a new haircut. And you're just like that flush of like embarrassment. Yeah. Like tenfold of like the fear of, oh my God, like, are my parents going to hate me? Am I going to get kicked out of church? I mean, church was a huge part of my life. I was raised Southern Baptist and very active in my church and still am religious. But at the time I was like, I'm going to lose everything and I'm not going to be safe anymore. Like people are going to box me in and there weren't other queer people where I was from, except for like 2 or 3 in my high school that like, I didn't see myself in them. And, I just feel for them and I just always think about them, just hope they're doing well because they went through hell at my high school. I mean, they really did. And they had some antisocial tendencies as well, but it was just really unfair what they went through. And part of me was like, oh my God, it's like, is that what it means to be gay? Yeah. Like, I remember the first gay person that I like noticed.
Do I have to do this?
In TV was like the secretary from Ugly Betty, I think. Oh my God. Like, and I didn't watch Ugly Betty. I just like walked in, saw the character and was like, oh my God, I don't want to be that. But now I'm just like, what an icon, like I've grown to the point where I'm just like recognizing that I could be a fuller spectrum of who I wanted to be. And if that meant effeminate, that I could be that, right? Like I didn't have to, again, pigeonhole myself into just being the straight guy or the gay guy. Yeah. Like I could be all the things at once.
That's very relatable. I think people can relate to that. I know when I think most of us when we're kids, we see adults, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, oh man, do I have to be that way when I'm an adult? Is that when adult is? You know what I mean? So that's a very relatable feeling to have. Even if you can't understand when someone says there's this sexuality or that or something, like you can understand these types of feelings that you're talking about. You can relate in that way. That's very relatable. I mean, and when you have these like one-on-one conversations, and I do make an effort to like not shut out people who, when I say homophobic, I do say it in a like, I don't think, there are homophobic people in the world, but I like to, especially the people who are in my life who have said homophobic things or do homophobic things. Yeah. I want to separate, like they're good people, right? Like they make sure people who are sick have food like to eat on Sunday. Like we make sure that they make sure that they're included. And so like I sit down and I do have those conversations. I'm like, well, like this is what I was going through, but more importantly, like with my work, right? Like to say like, can you imagine going through all of this as a straight person, much less like a queer person or a person of color? Like it's painful and it's harder because there's less support and there's less representation. So people are far less familiar, right? Have you noticed a difference when you have these conversations with people? I'm sure you've had instances where someone is receptive and, you can kind of see them trying to understand. And then you have experiences where someone's just like, nope, don't get it. Yeah. Have you had those too?
I have had many conversations, especially with like conservative, like people from conservative backgrounds. Yeah. To say like, that makes sense. Or, actually just as a tangent, my favorite story was one that was my dad was telling me. So there is a well-known, what I would say, a well-known lesbian in my hometown. Okay. That everyone adores, right? Like she was known as like, you can imagine like a classic like archetype of a lesbian.
Okay.
Very just awesome person as well. And, that really helped with getting my community like just familiar with it, right? Like they're just like, oh, well, she's a lesbian. They whisper it. She's like, she's a lesbian. She's a lesbian. But at the end of the day, all of them loved her. And she's moved back to my hometown with her partner.
Nice.
Right. And like my dad was talking to me about it, and he just goes, we're sitting over there and we're getting ready. We're just talking, shooting the shit with each other. And we start talking about, some of the women in town. And I'll be damned, man, she likes women more than I do. And it was just like, great. And he goes, and she was a better shot. She worked harder to clean up the space. Like she told us to, shut our mouths that we talk too much, that she's there to hunt. And like, it's just fantastic sort of representation in that way. And so she alone just existing, proving that like she's as much of a human being as they are, like it has gone a long way for them. But now on the other end, there are people who have, kind of blown back in my face. Like I had a very progressive friend in high school who was the first person I came out to.
Wow.
Right. And she seemed accepting. Right. But when things got kind of tough, she would bring up my sexuality in front of people, or she would share it with her, boyfriend, or who was also my friend. Like, she would talk kind of behind and share that information. And one, that's not her journey to share. That's not her truth to share. Yeah. Right. Like I was going to do it when I was comfortable doing so. Yeah. And I kind of was forced to do it because she had put me in a situation where we kind of like stopped being friends. Yeah. And it wasn't out of a lack of understanding. It was her like kind of indignance to me saying, please don't.
She's not respecting what you want.
She didn't respect the boundary. Yeah. And I mean, it basically blew up, and it was a very explosive situation. And it was like, in her mind, very progressive person. In practice, like what she was actually like living, she wasn't understanding of the journey, because she was just like, wow, I already know, I'm on Tumblr and I read many a post. And so I know that kind of, you should be more comfortable coming out. And it was like, dude, like you don't know the journey. And mind you, this was before, queer people got the blanket right to not be discriminated against in the workplace. Right. Like, and at the time I was like, I could easily just be, discriminated against. Right. Like, and this was like coming right out of college too. Right. Like, and I was just like, I don't know if that would have ever happened, but it could have been a possibility. Yeah. Right. And so, that was definitely one of the worst blowbacks that I've kind of faced coming out, for sure.
I remember when they repealed "Do Not Ask, Do Not Tell" in the military. I remember I was in, and what I'm doing right now, right? This podcast, the things that I'm about to get into, it's all comes from, me doing a lot of soul searching myself. And I'm trying to figure out what the most authentic version of myself is, And so, for me, that's just figuring myself out and speaking my mind about things that I believe and all that kind of stuff. And I try to imagine what doing this would be like if I was in some sort of marginalized demographic. I think that's why I empathize so much. The first two topics, this is episode number 2. Yeah. Both topics have been LGBTQIA plus related. Yeah. And it's not like that's the podcast I'm going for, no. But that's just how it worked out, I have a lot of feminine tendencies myself. Sure. And I know growing up, I had several, are you gay? Are you gay? And just the way someone said, are you gay? Yeah. Like, would there be something wrong if I was? Yeah. So it's definitely, I definitely experienced that a million times, as I said, but the initial shock is it's in a full, there's the indignance of it, like are you gay? Yeah. And there's like, oh my God, you're gay? Like an excitement. It's just like, I love it when queer people do it, because that means, oh my God, you're a safe person. Yes. But like when it's not a novelty.
People do it, it's like, oh my God, an opportunity. Like, and it's like people love to have a gay best friend or
this isn't a
have a lesbian friend. It's like, tokenization is, I can't speak to the totality of it, but I can definitely say in my experience, it hurts, right? It hurts to be pigeonholed because like, I remember, there was like a time when I had just come out and one of my friends, so well meaning, but she sent me like her in like a million dresses. And I was like, just cause I like men doesn't mean I like, know anything about fashion.
Yeah.
You've seen how I dress. I am pretty like, frat boy at the time.
You could pass off, I mean, I don't think I would do a double take. I'm like, oh, that's gay. That guy's bi or something like that.
You just have to stare at me long enough and you'll figure it out. But like, it's definitely just kind of a difficult thing because you're just like, love you. And I so appreciate you. But again, I'm not the guy to ask for that. Like, I'll crowdsource it for you. Like we'll figure it out together. But it definitely is difficult because on the one end, you're just so, especially when you're first coming out, you're so happy to be taken in that you feel like if you resent any of that, like, welcoming that friend might push back and like that they might feel unappreciated or resentful that you're just like, oh, I did my best. And it was just like, totally. But that doesn't mean that like our relationship and dynamic changes. Like you still owe me like some grace and I'm still figuring this out. And like, when I was listening to, that first episode too, I was like, it takes me back to so many other conversations that I've had that like, the queer community itself has to be its own advocate always, no matter how like well, educated we are on this space. Right. So like to refer back to what you had said with, the guy who said, oh, trans is homophobic. This space is our community itself it can be very messy and like, where is the discourse going? Yeah. Right. Like people are often splitting hairs and, if it's not coming from a place of understanding and tolerance and acceptance, then it's often not going in the right direction. Yeah. Right. And what I would say about, a gay person saying something like trans is homophobic is actually like a reflection of transphobia, which is to believe that, like someone's gender expression is a challenge to your own. Right. Yeah.
I've had a problem with that too. Someone doing their thing, like, oh, does that mean that, I'm not, delegitimizing or negating you. I'm just saying this is me. Yeah. This is me. I heard the term colorism recently. Yeah, Are you familiar? I asked someone, and I thought it was like, it had to do something with one race versus another. And they're like, no, they were talking about this one community of Black people and how I guess the lighter skin, I forgot what it was, but it was like lighter skin versus darker skin. I'm just like, damn, that sucks because you're right. It's like you're all part of the same demographic that's receiving the same hate. And it's really unfortunate to hear that there's discourse within a community that you're right. If you're not going to be the advocates for the people in your own group, that's just you're not going to ever be as accepted in the wider world if within you're so torn.
Yeah. And when we say community, I think it gives this sense of loyalty, which when you're first starting out, you need, right? You want to bring as many people into the umbrella. Yeah. Like the reason why it's the LGBTQIA+ is because we were all lumped into one space, right? It was not a choice of like the lesbians and the gays and the trans communities, like, inherently felt a connection just because of who they are, right? It's because that connection was, molded by a broader society. With colorism, that's a super fascinating like conversation in itself because this is a long history in the United States alone. It is an aspect of colonization that goes from not just the United States, but you can find this throughout South America. You can find this throughout the African colonies, especially South Africa. One of the great American like novels is Passing, right? And it is a whole concept of like a light-skinned woman or two women being able to pass in white society in the 20s and 30s, I think. And highly recommend passing on Netflix, even if you don't want to read the book. The book is, it's beautifully written, but I personally was like, oh, it's a little too old for me to appreciate.
Yeah.
But the movie, Tessa Thompson, another bisexual, very important to
Love Tessa
note.
Thompson.
But she's in it, and it's just phenomenal. It's a phenomenal movie and it's a phenomenal story. And yeah, colorism, as much as, kind of a mirror is, all the different breaking points of the queer community and how we're doing infighting. And that, from my perspective, what I'm seeing in our, African communities with the folks that we're working with, right? We often have to take time to talk about things like colorism, but also transphobia and homophobia, pronoun usage, right? Like we have an education program that, we're bringing all these people in classes every year, 3 times a year, but it takes about 3 different classes to be like, hey, everyone, as a reminder, use the proper pronouns, put them in your bio, like, in your little Zoom name. Okay. And make sure you're using the proper pronouns there. And I mean, that's just for a matter of like, everyone's not perfect, right? And there's like a lot of grace that's given, especially within the community. So yeah.
Can I say something real quick? You said grace. Yes. Are you familiar with Brene Brown?
Maybe. Can you just
brother? Let me tell you this. Okay. Yeah. Queen Bee. Yeah. All right. That's her real name. All right. Yeah. Brene Brown. She is. Forgive me. All right, but she's like a social scientist, that kind of thing. Yeah. I got onto her a couple of years back by a friend of mine, and so she says it herself that her research is in shame. She does shame research and a lot of the things that come along with that, right? Because she believes in order to fix something, we have to know what the problem is. Yeah. We can't skirt it. We can't not talk about it, because if we don't address what the problem is, we're never going to fix anything. And she talks a lot about grace. She talks a lot about vulnerability. Yeah. And I've been thinking about that a lot as you've been talking, all these vulnerable moments that people are in, whether they're seeking asylum, whether they're coming out, whether, all that kind of stuff. And, when you talked about those people that accepted you, I think that we can find a lot more bond, okay, you're right. We have all these different communities, LGBTQIA+, the Black community, this community, that community, whatever community there is, right? If we can all be more accepting when we make ourselves vulnerable, man, the bond you get when someone embraces that vulnerability, it's awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is also a perfect plug for the education program that we run.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's called the Dream Academy. It's a 10-week course focusing on like employment readiness, leadership, I suppose, coaching, and social emotional wellness. Okay. And that component is about stripping away your internalized prejudice and, reflecting on your own behavior, and also just being proud about your identity. And of course, like, the folks that we're working with, again, are queer, like displaced persons. So that, internally displaced or refugee or asylees. And a lot of what we're saying is like, if you want to take back your power, in part, you have to be so ready to be your authentic self that you can be vulnerable, right? To, like I said earlier, coming out is not a single kind of instance. No, it is, and you're right. Every single person I meet, I have to come out. Yeah. Right. If I don't meet them at a club, if I don't meet them at a bar, that makes it very obvious that I'm into them, I have to tell them. Yeah. Right. And I have faced backlash for not doing so. Right. Like it's just like
backlash for not coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like nothing massive, right? Like I should probably stop saying backlash, but I have had friends or, people that I've met at events, conferences, or just like between friends who are just like, oh, like, why didn't you tell me I'm bi, like, or that you're bi? Like, why didn't you, like, what, and did I do something? Did I upset you? And I'm just like, no, oh my God, I didn't think to say anything. And it's not like a matter of like that I think down on people who are have that concern. It's just a reality of like, oh, well, I have to fit it into a conversation at some point when I'm meeting someone, or saying like, you know, asking my friend, like, do they know? Like, so I can just kind of avoid that.
That sounds exhausting.
It can be very exhausting. And that's the sort of vulnerability that we all have to come to terms with, right?
Yeah.
It's to like, I have to be willing to tell people who I am, so that I can make sure I know I'm in a safe place.
Yeah.
That to make sure that they don't feel offended that I didn't tell them. Like, there's just a lot of emotional labor that goes into relationships, especially when you're a queer person.
Why do you think they get offended at something like that? Why is it that, oh my God, you didn't tell me? What do you think that comes from?
I think this goes back to like just a long standing tradition that queer people are seen as other in the mainstream. And I think that otherness is like, I mean, queer people were being found out back in the day from arrests, right? Like gay gatherings, lesbian bars were being raided for as long as like American history has been around, right? And it's all in the newspaper, right? Like, oh, these, deplorable people, these, these people who are doing public indecency, these deviants, these perverts, like what, like as if just existing is just naturally wrong or against the grain. Yeah. And, again, this goes back to that human concept of we want to categorize everything and understand it and put them in the box. And it makes people upset when they don't know that you're in the box, right? And if I come out and say, oh, well, I'm not straight, I'm bi, or, oh, I'm not gay, I'm bi, it does upset people.
Yeah, very
right?
much.
And, it's from their perspective, they're just like, well, why didn't you want to be honest with me? And that's like the best case scenario. Often, I mean, like, I'm sorry, the best case scenario is like, okay, whatever. Like,
okay, cool,
like,
whatever.
Sure. But the second step down is like, yeah, like that's, I mean, why didn't you want to tell me? Like, what, why not? And the other case is like, F you, get out. Yeah. Right. Like that is the true worst case, but it's that kind of, I'd rather know from the beginning that where I'm going to stand than find out way down the line.
Yeah, I can see that. With the threat of there, of that being a divide in your relationship. I mean, yeah, we all want to know if something's going to last. So if just getting it out of the way now, hey, this is something that you might bother you. Does it?
Yeah.
No, yes, no. That kind of
exactly.
Cool. Can we move on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never want to ask like, do you have a problem with that? Like, no, because that I know people who do that. And it comes from a place of having to be guarded.
Yeah.
Right? Like people who have truly been hurt. And again, I'm very lucky to have found my community where people are just like, they're totally okay. Right. But there are people who've gone their whole lives and every single time they've come out, they've been kicked out of, their network.
You build up those walls, you get defensive, and that's just your survival. Yeah, you're not trying to be an asshole.
And it's a conversation I definitely have had a lot with, my coworkers, like, when I'm hanging out with them, because I've had the chance of going to Africa and that was pretty amazing. And I got to meet with them and they're just like, I'm often written off, like they'll say, I'm often written off as like the angry, like Black lesbian. Yeah. And it's like, as they've told me, they're just like, of course I'm like, guarded. Yeah. I come off as abrasive sometimes because I'm gearing up just in case, because where I live, all of my life has been like this way. And this has also happened. This also happens in the United States, right? Like the archetype of the angry Black woman is often so misused and unfairly portrayed. And as I was talking to my friend from Botswana who studied in the United States, she was like, I've always been seen as the happy, bubbly person, but here I am and I'm being targeted as the angry Black woman. And it's only because since I've gotten here, I've finally started experiencing racism on such a broad scale that like on the day-to-day scale that I just feel guarded. Like I feel like I have to brace myself for the racist who's going to be in the room. Yeah. And, I can't imagine what, she's going through, But from my perspective, I'm like, yeah, no, I get the having the walls up just in case. Like, gotta brace yourself just in case.
Yeah. I think that, you said, I can't understand what she's going through. I don't think you can understand exactly what she's going through. Obviously, there are very specific differences. But so let me say it this way, right? So my wife is Christian, non-denominational, and I don't really categorize myself in any religion. I don't consider myself, I'm not atheist. Because they're like, they're God's not real. I'm not agnostic because they're like, something exists. I just don't know what. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not willing to fall in any camp, but I'll go to church because I want to support her. Right. Mm-hmm. And when I go there, I try to find something, that, some sort of lesson in what they're talking about. If they're talking about something, I'm just like, I don't really believe that, I try to pull out some sort of life lesson. And I've found for me a lot of success in connecting with other people when they're telling me a story. You and I were from the same place. We look similar, but we've had different experiences. You've had a different experience than this person, but I found a lot of success in trying to find those commonalities, because when you peel back the onion, right, and there's these very different specific events, ultimately at the core of those things is the exact same feelings, and that's something that I feel like we could find a lot of success in, is let's remove all this extra bullshit, all these extra fucking details that are irrelevant, and understand we actually feel pretty damn similar about a situation, but people get so caught up in all the stuff we've talked about, and we can't see the forest for the trees,
Yeah, no, I mean, totally. And when we get down to this kind of like meat of, especially like identity, right? Like, I'm not just a queer person.
No.
Right. Like
you're not just a white person.
Exactly. I we used to look at the beginning, I was like, oh, I like anime too. Or, like, I love my family too.
Yeah.
I love my community. I love being active. I
want kids. I don't want kids.
Yeah, exactly. I like this is like, the sort of conversations that I have where it's not just constantly me talking about, the sexuality aspect of who I am. And I, when I was coming out, I was like very hesitant and kind of resistant, actually, of just saying like, but I'm not going to change. Like, don't worry. I'm the same person. I'm the same person. It's just like, it's sad because like, that's like, like an expectation that I have to clarify. Right. Because a lot of people say, well, I'm fine with you being gay, but I don't want that to be your full personality. And it's like,
cool, because it's not.
But what do you mean? Like, so you don't want me to talk about like the people I'm interested in? You don't want me to like, like we used to talk about sex stories, like swap stories and stuff like that, especially like in groups of guys, right?
That's what you do.
And like one of my best friends, I gave him so much shit when I like first came out to him, and we were talking, and he said like, oh, do you have partners? And I was like, yeah, I'm actually seeing a guy, nothing serious. And he was like, cool. And then the following time we hung out, I mentioned like kissing him or something. Mm-hmm. And my friend, who is a very progressive person, did like a face twitch, like of like, kind of like, like,
why would you,
like kind of
Matt,
like,
why would you say this?
Like kind of like like almost like gross out. And I was
you've
like,
ruined the vibe.
I was like, I love you, and I know it's going to take time, and so I'm giving you that grace.
Yeah.
But you can't grimace when I talk about hooking up with people. Yeah. And so and we laugh about it now because again, he's so well-meaning, and he's been one of my best allies. And
cool.
It is about these knee-jerk reactions as well, that are just so funny to sort of kind of reflect on, especially with people who consider themselves super accepting and tolerant. Like even they aren't free of prejudice. Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that the perspective you have, right, I think is wonderful, right? Because I think if we stop looking at people as either good or bad, right? I mean, and yes, there are some nightmare people out there. I'm not saying they're not. There are, and some people. That's a different conversation. Anyway, but if we can see that this is a good person, mm-hmm. but clearly there are some things they need to work on. isn't that what you should do with anyone you care about? Because none of us are perfect. I tell my wife, I'm like, listen, I rely on you to check me. Mm-hmm. If there's something I'm not doing as good as I can be doing, like, hey, you did a thing and I feel like you could have done it better if you looked at it this way, if you did it that way, that kind of thing. I feel like if we all take some responsibility in helping those people we care about, kind of focus on areas where they could improve. That's a much better method than just being like, he could have went and you could be like, done, relationship over. Yeah. I never want to see you again.
Yeah. And, I think both of us coming from Southern Baptist backgrounds, we are, it is ingrained to forgive, right? But also we come from Southern Baptist backgrounds where it's like, fire and brimstone.
Oh, you're going to hell.
Like the hellions are going to be damned. Like that's just that classic kind of belief. And I've always just been very resistant in it, right? Because I have always leaned on that forgiveness aspect. And I'm very lucky that my church, the pastor I grew up with, he was joy. And he was all about love and joy. And that was like the focus.
And that's the minority.
And I'm so lucky. Yeah, absolutely. And
mine was not like that.
Yeah, I mean, there are horror stories, right? There are horror stories, and I definitely have a lot of friends in the space, or in the human rights space, or in the queer identity, who are just like, you know what? I don't need to add to my life like any more challenges. I'm not going to pick up a new friend who like isn't comfortable with me talking about who I am.
Yeah.
And I totally get where they're coming from, right? Like I'm lucky because I had that high tolerance. And because of that sort of tolerance, I've been in a position to like be able to have the conversation with folks, like mediate that conversation without getting angry. But that's a privilege, right? And it's kind of almost what I've often said is a bi privilege, where I toe the line because I live at that intersection. And so I feel like I have to help bridge that divide.
I was just about to say the thing that you're in a great position to be a bridge.
Yeah.
And it's awesome that you're actually doing it.
I mean, it's tragic and it's unfair because not all bi people should be put in that situation. No. I made it it was a conscious decision for me to take that on.
Yeah.
But I know plenty of people who I feel are totally justified, and they were just like, I'm not giving that person the time of day. And I'm just like, yeah, I totally get it. That probably
don't feel obligated.
So that probably made you so mad. And I totally get where they're coming from.
Can I ask you how, because you said that you went to law school and now you're working for this nonprofit. Yeah. So my curiosity is, one, what made you go decision to law school?
Yeah.
And then the transition from law school to this nonprofit. What was that whole process? How'd you choose law school, and how does law school connect, or does it, to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So, I mean, law school, the law is the building blocks of, the real knit and grit of what society is built upon, right? Our understanding.
Yeah.
But, being from South Carolina, especially from a rural town, I was always really interested in like, well, there's the law, but then there's like actually how we live. Right. And there is a huge discrepancy between them. And I want to understand that. I was always just fascinating. And I love to argue. Always loved to argue. And so it was just always natural that I would go that route.
Yeah.
But it became more of like, well, I want to understand like how the United States works, because I feel like I feel a deep, devotion to my family and to my friends and to improving the lives around me, because where I'm from is very poor, right? Yeah. I grew up very privileged, but there is a lot of poverty. I mean, it's called the corridor of shame, which I resent, but like it's true in the way of our area is very impoverished. There is a drug issue. There is, it's not a town that you stop in, right? Which is a tragedy. It's a beautiful town, beautiful community.
Yeah.
And, like, the law made me kind of like always just drew me, because I also wanted to go into public office and still hope to one day.
Nice.
Yeah. And what got me into law school was just like, again, pursuing that dream, having a full picture. I always want a full picture of everything. I'm not always so like hesitant before making decisions. I don't want to come off as like, oh, I'm just an intellectual. Like, no. I go by gut often, but what I'm saying here is that, if I wanted to be in a position of power, I wanted to make sure I was the right kind of leader. And so I wanted to at least understand how our system works and our gaps. And that led me into like the more international realm of just like, well, let me compare what's the US doing right? What's it doing wrong? And, every country kind of brings its own little, interesting piece. Yeah. Like even what has said like a transitioning economy, like something a lot poorer country is doing really revolutionary things in a lot of ways, right? Like Rwanda is doing an incredible job as an example. Like, they're a very vastly developing nation. Okay. And they're phenomenal at like women's rights. Okay. Right. Like they are represented by majority of women after the Rwandan genocide. It gave a space for women to take a position of power. And, they have, of course, there are still challenges to women's rights, but they're vastly developing in that way. Mm-hmm. And, to kind of look at what we're doing in the United States, that was always just an interesting point to examine. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's that dichotomy of like, a lot of people say, oh, America's all good, America's all bad. But it goes back to the previous kind of tone that you're setting, which is that, no, America's complicated. Yeah. Like it has a lot of advantages and disadvantages of living here. And that's something I always have to communicate to, our beneficiaries, our community members, Safe Place, is that it's not going to be the perfect world. Like you're going to encounter people who are homophobic. You're going to encounter the, potentially abject poverty, like especially if you're like around in West Virginia where the Appalachia is like not so far away.
No, it's not.
Right. And come from South Carolina. I've seen it.
That's not a good spot for people.
Well, I mean, like, I was, again, very involved in the church and we did a lot of service projects. And I remember going to a house to help build a wheelchair ramp. I go inside to a friend, like, I knew him from around town. Yeah. And his floor, it was actually like molding, and there were some spots where it was like there was dirt on the ground, and like it was dirt floor, like in sometimes, and it was just like it's heartbreaking, right? Yeah, like that exists in the United States. Yeah, and so that's kind of like what led me into law and wanting to be in policy and help my community.
Most definitely.
Yeah, and then being in law school specifically was like just an eye opening to like just kind of the interconnectedness of the global community.
Yeah. There's some questions I have for you, but just to kind of like sidebar real quick, you brought up a couple of things. One, the topic of leadership. Yeah. I've read books. I am vastly interested in the differences between good teams and bad teams. Yeah. And it sounds like you are too. Let me put you on someone else. Simon Sinek. Have you heard of? Simon Sinek. Maybe. I'm going to send you a text after this.
That's what I need. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to send, because I'm the same way. I'm going to send you a text of some authors and some books and just kind of what those books are about, because I've read those and man, I tell you what, it has changed me vastly. But I was interested in learning kind of like what got you into law. So that's what got you into law. And then I definitely at some point we're gonna have to talk on another episode. Yeah. Because you going into politics, I'm interested in that. And like, man, that could be a whole episode in itself. How did you go from law school to working for Safe Place?
Yeah. So I was actually just kind of burned out after law school. Full disclosure, I was like, I am so done with this for at least a bit. I need to breathe, figure out what I actually want. I can
only imagine.
Because like I didn't even really like apply very hard for jobs, because I was just like, I'm going to pass the bar and figure my life out for a second. Like, what do I actually want to do? Because I was like, I don't think I never want to go in before a judge. That is the most terrifying thing in the world to me.
Not trying to do that.
They can be mean. Did you know that, America? Like, they can be really mean to you. And they think that you're making a stupid point. They will say, that's a really stupid point. Oh man, like no. I saw this meme once that was like, dear lawyers, how do you argue without crying? And I'm just like, I'll let you know when I figure that out. No, I mean, like, of course I love arguing, but like being on a stage was never something that I was really fascinated with. Gotcha. Mediation and alternative dispute resolution, where people are coming together and creating their own, like, solution.
It matches what you were talking about.
Love that. but yeah, so I was just kind of like burned out. I was like, I don't know what I want to do yet. And prepping for that, I was like, I have some friends that I've met through school who live abroad.
Mhm.
Can I go, maybe crash with them for a couple of days?
Yeah.
And I had this one really good friend who said, yeah, come crash with me as long as you want. Like truly,
Nice.
as long as you want.
Nice.
I live in Athens, Greece. Like, come on over. And
How long?
I think I had said like just a month, but then I was like, well, I don't have to leave until like, either you kick me out or I run out of money.
If someone left me an open invitation like that, it's going to be longer than a month.
Yeah, I mean, like it was kind of like a potential romantic thing and didn't work out that way.
Gotcha.
Like towards the end, but like, it was just like, this will be fun. Like this was going to be great. And, he was working and I was like, well, if you're going to work during the weekday, I don't like being idle for too long because I'm a big TikTok person. Like I love TikTok. And so if you leave me alone, I will burrow into the TikTok and I'll waste hours of my day as I often do now. But I was like, let me just start volunteering. I was like, let me look into refugee work.
Yeah.
That's always something I don't know about it, but let me like look into it. And actually the guy I was living with, one of his friends was a beneficiary of Safe Place.
Nice.
And I reached out, got connected.
Yeah.
Filled out a random form, like, classic Google form, and was contacted about volunteering. And I did a good enough job as a volunteer to kind of be brought on with the team. And yeah, I've been there almost a year now.
Almost a year. And you said now you're doing what development?
The development director.
Development director.
That once more. Development director. So it's like basically everything from like partnerships to raising money to
developing the nonprofit.
Yeah, helping develop.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and I also do like just basic in-house kind of legal work as well. So it does tie in. Like I do help oversee like lease agreements, partnership agreements, just employment agreements as well. And I'm there to help negotiate as well with different like funding opportunities and potential partners. So it's really a lot of the skills that I learned in law school are what I needed for this job.
Gotcha.
And I mean, I'm definitely taking a hit, right? Because you could go big law, you could go to the big firm, make very comfortable salary.
Oh, goodness.
I, of course, did not choose that route because why make life easy? And
I know, right?
But I feel very whole at the end of the day working with the team that I do.
Yes.
And working in the field that I do. And it's great because like when I go to these conferences, when I go to events, when I'm, hosting, right, I get to talk about this community and like what they're achieving because I truly don't want to make it about me. Yeah. I want it to truly focus on what they're doing. Yeah. And yeah, it's just, we've been able to rapidly expand in ways that other organizations haven't. And it's because we are working through the queer refugee community, right? To not just as like to uplift their voice, but actually listen to what they're saying. So like they're in charge of recruitment for our programs. They are in charge of both of our flagship global programs for housing and for education. They are the one. We have members on our board. We have, of course, members on our team. They're leading the country movements. When we meet with embassies, I have the country leaders on those meetings because ultimately that's the connection and conversation that has to happen, not me, right? Yeah. So I don't know what's going on the ground every day. No, they do.
Yeah.
So,
and I've read a lot about that. When you have people on a team or an organization or a business, whatever it is, right? The more that those people that make up the organization feel like they have a stake in what's going on, right? Like this is mine. I just do this with other people. Like, no, I just work for them. Like, no, this is mine and this is what we do. The effects you get out of those people are vastly different than you have with someone who just, I just work here. I just work here.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what's really incredible is not are we just, hiring them on and listening to what they're saying, but we're also we are investing in their projects, right? So what I love about the organization is that we were created because we identified a gap, right, at that intersection of refugee and LGBTQIA+. But when we're going in this, right, when we're going through this education process and, training procedures and things like that, our members started coming back and they were just like, this is so great. Like, what about doing something like this for children? Or, what about like the older population of, queer folk. Like no one's taking care of them.
Yeah.
And so we were like, well, we of course can't do everything. We want to do everything, but we of course can't.
Yeah.
So what we started doing was like kind of like micro investments, micro grants to our program graduates to like lead their own thing. And
gotcha. Okay. Entrusting them to do what's most effective.
They've identified their own gaps.
Gotcha.
And so we want to be able to, and they say like, if you gave me like this small investment, like they're talking about like $500 for like 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like,
yeah.
To be able to like open an old person's home for queer elders. And it's going really well.
That's
like
awesome.
My favorite like example that like really just, oh man, just like gives me, it just, man, it's right in the heartstrings. But we had a graduate who was like, in the outskirts of Cape Town. Okay. There's a place called Capricorn, and it's one of the most dangerous areas out, in Cape Town, right?
Yeah.
And even in South Africa. And people aren't typically like, if you're an outsider, people are really, suspicious of you and you're not really welcome there.
Yeah.
Well, one of our community members had kind of like a friend who is a single mother there, and we do work with single mothers in some of our programs. And they were like, if you can give us just like a $200 investment to like feed the children there, it will be like worthwhile, because not just like children will be fed for a bit, right? Like that's just in and of itself a great project. Yeah. But they were like, we need to have representation of queer folks doing good, doing the work of like UN, UNHCR is the organization, or to do what the embassy does, or to do what like large organizations like the Human Rights Campaign kind of focus on. Like if we can have obviously queer people handing out food, it could change the paradigm. Yeah. And it did. Like what was so incredible is we fed they fed children. Yeah. And we had this very signature like rainbow vest that's bright yellow with a huge rainbow. People know. Right? Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very obvious. Yeah. And we stick out. And we just spent the afternoon feeding the children and playing soccer with them for just the afternoon. And one of the little girls went home and started talking about the awesome day she had. And her parents, of course, asked her like, who are these people? Was it the United Nations? Awesome. Was it the US? Yeah. Like, who was it? And she was like, no, it was a lesbian. It was a lesbian. A lesbian.
The lesbians.
Yeah, a lesbian gave me food. And not only did she do that, I got to play soccer with her. And, oh my gosh, like she, kind of like took the ball from me. Like she was kind to me. Like she taught me some like things, and like it was just a great day. And like what came from just that conversation was actually her uncle, is a member of like kind of, I guess, the crime syndicate. I don't know how to phrase that.
Okay, yeah.
And we don't obviously promote like criminal activity or things like that. But what came
not affiliated,
exactly, no affiliation.
Yeah.
But what he did was he went around network and said, the people in the rainbow vests are welcome into the community. They helped my niece. Yeah. My niece loves them. Yeah. I don't care what they are. I don't care if they're lesbian. I don't care if they're gay. They're doing good. Yeah. If they come to do good, they're welcome to be here. Yeah. And so now we have access, not just into Capricorn, but into the surrounding areas of Cape Town. Yeah. That like international organizations that have been working for decades haven't been welcome in. Yeah. Right. We show up and people know to come to us and like take us through, say, like, we've been to like villages that are built from like abandoned tires or car doors and things like that, and like gone through, and we're welcomed in there to talk about what's needed. Yeah. And we have continued to invest in these projects where like the queer people are known as in these like circles known as the good people. Yeah. And that tore down like, I would say, centuries of prejudice in just one act. And it's because all of this is because we listened to our community members. We listened to our leaders who said, I'm a refugee. I know where the poor people are and I know what they need. Just follow me and trust me that I know what I'm talking about. and phenomenal things have happened because of it. It doesn't seem like a complicated formula, but
it's not. It's not. But I think what makes it so effective, right, is that you have so many people in the world that are suffering in one way or another, and that's actually one of the things in the military that I've been a part of dealing with. You know, we've been in places where we're trying to go up against like Al Qaeda. And so we are trying to interact with a town or a village or a tribe or something like that. And Al Qaeda's already come in and they're like, hey, here's food, here's water, here's all the things you need, And when people, I don't know what it is, but I think that's why it's so effective. You see a gap, you see there's a need for something. You're trusting your people on the ground to make these observations, make a small request. They do amazing things with it. And you're having these huge effects because everyone's ignoring these people. It's this small little thing you could do that's going to have such great effects. And now I like to think that, and it's one hard thing to do. It's hard to do a good thing and not see the fruits of your labor, And I think that's what keeps a lot of people from doing. I don't see what it's doing for me, or I don't see the good things that are happening. But if you can just trust the process, I wonder how many people in Capricorn and the surrounding areas are now going to be a part of what y'all are doing, or they're going to take those principles and those ideas that y'all have, and they're going to spread those. And how much is Safe Place going to change the world in ways that maybe we can't make the connections, but these people are now, their lives are changed because of it.
Yeah, and a lot of the sort of anti-LGBTQ movement that we've seen like in Florida and Texas. Yeah. You've heard the worst of the worst people and like what they're alleging, right? Is that like a teacher showing an option or showing the existence of queer people is subverting children, right? That's often like the grooming of children is often an argument used. Yeah. And not just the US, but that still is in existence in where we are in Africa, right? And where our members are working. And so they also walk a very fine line. But what's beautiful is that the children are going home and they're like, today the lesbian taught me about gratitude and being kind. And they're just like, oh, well, I didn't know lesbians knew anything about that. It's like, well, yeah. and it's the same
Who's teaching those lesbians that?
Exactly. And it's the same thing in the United States. That's just so heartbreaking. I don't know, the teacher, I can't remember where I saw this, what state this was, but last year, like the teacher of the year quit his job because of, it was either Florida or Texas, but they're they're book burning, their attack on, literature and things. Yeah. And it was just like, he's like, how do I not, talk about my husband? Like teachers go into class and talk about their husbands so often, right? I had people in high school and middle school and primary school teachers who probably talked about, their home life too much with children.
There's a balance you have to strike.
Yeah, exactly. But here's like a gay man who's just saying like, you're telling me to deny who I am because you think that these fifth graders aren't ready to talk about the existence of gay people and trans people. Yeah. Right. Because this is the assault, right? It's not about teachers wanting to teach children about gay sex. It's about teaching children the existence of queer people.
It's a hard topic to completely avoid, especially I've taught before at one point in the military I was teaching, you do something for so long and they're like, all right, we need you to teach these new kids coming in how to do it. And oftentimes they encourage you. They're like, take your experience and apply it to the lesson. So that way these kids can learn, okay, the things I'm being taught connection to the real world. Yeah. And that's a way of learning something is here's a thing, here's how it connects to the real world. Now I've heard the same thing. I've heard, these teachers are trying to, what was the term?
Groom.
Yeah, groom.
Evil word.
I hear that all the time.
Which is a terrifying thing also to allege to someone.
That's a serious accusation. That's a real serious accusation.
Pedophilia scapegoat is a long-term assault against queer people. I mean, I took, the classic like history 101 in college.
Yeah.
And when we got into like the 50s, 60s era of US history, our professor played us an old video that was like, a PSA, like promoted from like the like local government, saying like, keep your eye out for like pervy Pete. Don't make sure your kids know not to talk to pervy Pete because he is, as you know, a homosexual. Oh. And like the clip ends with a grown man holding a little boy's hand, like a 11-year-old, and walking towards like a comfort inn.
Jesus.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, like to imagine that the people to equate the LGBTQIA plus with pedophilia it's so terrifying.
What I don't like too is that by being inaccurate with what you're saying or what you're teaching or what you're showing or what in any way, if you're being inaccurate with information, that's doing a disservice to, in this example, kids, right? Because there are actual things kids need to look out for. Yeah. And I know I have 3 of them, right? Mm-hmm. One of them is she's about to turn 10. God bless her. Yeah. But this chick does not pay attention. I tell her all the time, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. So I have to be very careful. Like if she wants to go do a thing or something like that, I have to be very careful. I have a very limited amount of time and words that I can say that she'll pay attention to. Yeah. Yeah. And so I have to be very careful about pay attention to this. And I can't go off into this or that or the other thing because now kids, it's like, well, I don't know,
Yeah. With the kind of, I guess, the allegations and the attacks, especially what we're seeing from the far right. Yeah. Right. Against the concept of the queer community. And it's how they juxtapose it to, pedophilia. Mm-hmm. It is a terrifying like conflation because like, often when I was growing up, I got to a point where of course I was still advocating for like gay marriage and things. Yeah. And they're just like, well, if it's gay marriage today, it's bestiality tomorrow and it's pedophilia the next day. And it's just like, whoa. How did you make that massive leap from a consensual existence and like form of love to raping children and animals? And it's
there's slippery slope and then there's the cliff that you just
exactly. And this is a very hard topic to talk about because what happens when these allegations are made, right, is that people take an assault rifle into a pizza like joint, right, to like find the pedophilia camps, right, and it's based on absolute delusion, or they threaten queer people like in public spaces, right. It's a very terrifying thing that has true consequences, and also the background irony that a lot of the conservatives saying that are actual pedophiles and, and are like actually threatening, children's lives. So it's a very terrifying kind of allegation, an unfair one, and that we have to be very mindful of it when we're in Africa, as well. Like, because if that's alleged, then we aren't welcomed and our people can be then targeted. Damn. Yeah. So we're always very mindful of like, everyone is always together. Yeah. Everyone is, when with kids, we have to be it's just like things that you have to think about. Yeah. That like, a female teacher in that same situation would never, like, it would never cross her mind to be conscious of how others might perceive her. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
One of the things that I'm hoping to, here's one of the motivations I had when I was like, I think this would be a good idea, podcast. You hear batshit crazy things from the far right, like absolutely like insane things. You hear batshit crazy things from the far left, and you hear these things on whatever outlet you're receiving information from. And I suppose I was like, I want to help balance things out a little bit. Right. And I want there to be more voices like yours, like mine, like Brea's, like my wife, like other people that I hope to have on this podcast, where it's like, hey, by the way, not everyone's fucking insane. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, okay, so you disagree. Let's say there's someone out there, and you've talked about some friends of yours that, let's say there's someone out there that disagrees with you, but they're of a rational mind, right? And maybe they just need to have someone say some things in a certain way that's, you know what? I get that. Now we have one less person going into wherever the fuck with a shotgun, doing some absolutely nightmarish shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the great privileges I have is having been raised in the church and feel very religious and really grounded in my faith. But it's been a bridge, right? Like to talk about really difficult issues with people, especially if they completely disagree with me in every way, is to say, well, how does that fit in? How does your very I would say just absolutely egregious policy on this front. How do you marry that with the Bible, and how do you marry that with scripture? Like that doesn't work with your beliefs. And I'm being vague, because we can get into the details of each of those things. But at the same time, I've just seen a lot of really great things that come out of meeting people at their roots, about peeling back those layers, as you said earlier,
for real,
to really getting to what is the core of what they actually believe here.
For real.
And, I do always try to be mindful as well of that dichotomy of the ultra liberal and the ultra radical right. Yeah. Because to me, from my perspective, right, from a global scale, is that the US is really shifted to the right. Especially in recent days. I mean, the Overton window, right? I think I'm sorry if that's the wrong term, but it's the concept of
we called Leah Thomas. Leah Thompson. We called her that all day Sunday. So let me go ahead and put the annotation out there now. It's Leah Thomas, not Leah Thompson. Gotcha. So trust, if you say something wrong, I just try to say, listen, I might be wrong. Don't take me in my word for it, but blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So it's the concept of when an extremist comes into the conversation, you have to spend so much time focusing on disproving or meeting some of their demands that you end up dragging the whole focus away from the actual center of where the majority lies, right? Agreed. So for instance, the abortion issue, majority of the United States is on board with a very specific policy. And the reason,
do you think that's the policy that just got overturned?
Well, yeah. So I'm not trying to derail you. I want to be grounded in what I say. So the overturning of Roe. I mean, the vast majority of Americans do agree with Roe being in place, a vast majority. Okay. Right. Yeah, that's what I thought too. We can talk about shifting the line. People have different opinions about where that line should be. Yeah. For the last, I guess, point in which a woman can get an abortion. Yeah. Or a person can get an abortion. But when the conversation is shifted to just whether or not Roe is abortion as itself is a valid conversation, or a valid choice, there's no conversation on where that line is anymore, right? It's no longer a conversation on pinpointing who's involved and what are the different procedures. How do you get a person there? That's not a conversation anymore, right? I'm having to spend hours just fighting for the conversation that women should have access, right? And that is a conversation that was had half a century ago that we're having to revisit and rehash. And often it's coming from an uneducated space, I would say.
I get scared too. I get scared whenever so something is, bad, right? But let's say in some way it's necessary or something like that. I get really scared at the idea of someone saying this thing is not allowed in any way, under any circumstances, for any reason. I do not care. Because then what's going to happen is people are going to do it anyway. Some people are going to find, and the people that do find ways of doing it, now it's not regulated. It might not be safe. Yeah, exactly. Some people are, okay, well, now I can't get one. And again, I'm not about to pretend like I know what the experience is, or I've ever had to go through the thought process of, should I get an abortion or not? But I have heard enough to know that a lot of women don't just make that decision like, I'm going to go get an abortion.
Yeah.
Woohoo. Like, hey, what you doing Friday night? I'm going to get an abortion. Like, no, it is a traumatic experience for a lot of women. And to take that away when some women make that decision, you know, because, man, this might come down to either me or the baby, or I don't know, for whatever reason, I hate that has been taken away now. Yeah. It's scary.
It is a false characterization of the situation, like you're saying, and that you know that the right has kind of created, especially because it's easier to like get people behind that sort of idea. And
hey, real quick, if you don't mind, I don't mean to interrupt you. How much longer do I have you for? How much longer can we hang out?
We're fine.
Okay, cool. Because I mean, again, I have a whole list of questions in my head, and I definitely
3:45-ish, probably
3:45-ish.
I mean, at that point, I'll just say 4. Yeah,
gotcha. Okay, all right, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, yeah. So as like what I was trying to say, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that when we're talking about like the radical left and the radical right, I just wanted to make the point that like those in power, right?
Yeah.
What people often construe it like when you say radical left, radical right, who comes to mind for both is like Marjorie Taylor Greene versus AOC is like typically what you'll see in media.
Okay.
Right. And when we talk about Overton window, right? Like who, like where the conversation is.
Yeah.
Like AOC's radical agenda, and I use that word lightly because she's coming from a place of, I want to make sure that disparities are closed. I want to make sure people are like my own community is given the best opportunity.
Most definitely.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene, I say very blatantly, like she is a Nazi. She is a Nazi.
Yeah.
Like she talks about Jewish space lasers and it's just so out of pocket, right?
Yeah.
But we have to spend so much time talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene to say it's not acceptable. Like she and Lauren Boebert running around calling, you know, gay teachers pedophiles makes us say like, you know, we spend again hours, days, weeks combating and tearing down that sort of like vision that they've just thrown together out into the void just because they're assholes and they're bigots, right? And like, you know, I always say there is a compromise like with things, but we have to always be mindful of like where the actual like, you know, majority or middle ground truly is and where it's grounded. Yes.
It's so it's so easy to get caught up. I hear people I know say, man, you know, one side, man, they're destroying America or something like that. I'm like, not really.
No.
Not really. It's out there. Yes, it's always going to be out there. And we're never going to be in utopia. And it's never going to be a paradise where racism never exists or sexism never exists or stuff like that. But I was like, it's not the majority of people. I'm like, go out there, talk to people. I love doing it. And what you find out is a lot of people think the same way as you. You know, it's like, you know, these things exist. Yeah, they're bad things, but not everyone is extreme. The problem is that when one is extreme, like the ones that you named, they are so loud. That's part of being extreme, loud, is that you have these batshit crazy ideas and you just want to scream them every waking hour that you have. And so then you're going to think, oh man, things are burning to the ground. It's not as bad as they would like you to think it is.
Yeah, exactly. And this gets back to like, what is that common, like, you know, core of the human being experience, which is that like, it goes back to that picture I was talking about with my dad and his hunting buddies.
Yeah.
And the local lesbian.
Yeah.
Who is completely tearing down their whole like paradigm.
And she was just being her, I bet. She's not like thinking like, oh, how can I be the best example of, no, she's just being her.
Yeah. And like often the conversation is like, oh, like they don't act or seem queer. And it was like, well, I mean, that's just who they are, right? It's just a facet of who you are. Yeah. And when we tear down those extreme voices and we look at like, what are people's actual experiences and connecting and getting to know one another, it's that like, at the end of the day, everyone agrees we just want a good life for ourselves. We want to pursue happiness. We want to pursue like, you know, love and family.
Yes.
And, you know, and jobs. People want to have jobs and make something of themselves. Yeah. And that's what we've found with our own, like, you know, our own community members at Safe Place. They are not just so focused on, you know, so dedicated on creating a good life for themselves. They want to make sure people around them are having a good life. Yeah. Because they know what it's like to be disregarded. Right. Yeah. So that's how we started this single mother program. At first was like just LGBTQ, like single parents. Yeah. To being single mothers generally, because they were like, yes, I know that we focus on, you know, queer backgrounds and queer identities, but these single mothers could so learn and gain from what we're doing. Yeah. So we opened up a whole nother thing because we're not going to say no because we trust our community. Right? There's so much value in all of these different identities coming together and talking about, again, what's at that core of like socio-emotional wellness and awareness of I want to be vulnerable. I want to be able to be a good parent for my children. Yes. And
I think what y'all are doing is really, really good. The way you're doing it is really, really good. I think that's why y'all are seeing so much success. And you know, I can't imagine y'all doing anything other than continuing to grow, to continuing to expand the amount of programs y'all have. Because when you take an idea like what y'all have, when you find such a large gap, right, and people being able to live authentically is a great cause, no matter what that is. And I think what y'all are really doing well is, all right, you've learned, go back into your community. Let's not just, come over to America. No, let's spread this to where you are. Let's change the dynamic, the way people see things over there, because then, you know, you're changing just so much.
Yeah. Our founder often says that the disparity that the general, I guess the mainstream looks at between like the West and, you know, what we would say is like the West, right? The United States, for instance, and African nations, is that people often see that like, oh, America is so affluent, has all the opportunity, all the resources, and like Africa has like nothing. And also, of course, Africa is not a monolith. But what we try and tear down is like, there are so many other values and currencies and wealth that you can have, right? And much like in the United States, there's so much poverty in other ways outside of finance. We have plenty of financial poverty, but we also have this grand individualism that disconnects our communities with one another. Yeah. And that people have gotten to a point where they're like, well, I can have my, you know, suburban house, or I can have my like single apartment, and my life is my life, and I don't give a shit about anyone else. And what we're trying to really focus on in Africa is like, or, you know, our communities in Africa or in Southern Europe, wherever we are, is that, oh my gosh, like you can build community. Yeah. You can build a network that supports you of like-minded and, you know, those who have difference of opinion with you. Yeah. And do it in a way of like you are leading, right? Yeah. Like you don't have to be up on a podium to lead. You can be in the community, making sure that people are okay, that they feel empowered to speak, that they feel like that they have the backing that they need to be authentic. Yeah. So,
Matt, I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. Sure. I only say that now just because, I mean, there's a lot of things, and this is definitely like, I'm going to need another episode with you. Yeah. Because there are certain topics I'm like, if we get into this now, it's going to run a long time.
Listen, I can spiral with the best.
I can get lost. But with the time that we have remaining, I want to do one last plug for Safe Place. Yes. So if we could, let's just talk about some of the details about the upcoming events, and then maybe any sort of other opportunities. If people want to, I want to volunteer, I want to do this, I want to do that. Where can they go?
Yeah. So first off, Safe Place International, you can easily find us. Our website is safeplaceinternational.org.
Super easy.
Yeah. Super long, but super easy. And you can always email me directly. I'm always open to that. And it's just Maxwell at safeplaceinternational.org.
Okay.
And the upcoming event, again, is October 11th here in DC.
6 to 9, right?
6 to 9.
6 to 9.
Yep, on a Tuesday, but it is for National Coming Out Day.
Yeah, it's a big day.
Yeah, it's a pretty big day. So even though it's a Tuesday, I hope everyone shows up to have a great time.
Most definitely.
Maybe, just I always jokingly say, like, in the office, so I don't know if I should say this now, but black out with us on a Tuesday. It'll be great.
There you go.
Have some drinks though. I mean, seriously, come and have drinks, meet great people, have some great food. But yeah, and again, Safe Place International, we work with LGBTQIA plus refugees and asylum seekers across Africa and Europe. And our programs, again, start at the fundamental building blocks of how to create a life for yourself, integrate into society, and then pursue the future that you want for yourself.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And so that's all for now. But I mean, we have so many other events going on.
Yeah.
And the easiest thing is always just to reach out and ask for a calendar, because we have a lot of partnerships going on. So if you want to do virtual stuff, we have that. If you are in the Bay Area, if you're in California, if you're in New York, we have something at some point.
Yeah.
And we're always about building community.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to throw all the links into the descriptions whenever I go to post this up. Normally I'd only post on Tuesdays, but I know the time sensitivity. Yeah, sure. I'm going to head home. I'm going to start doing them edits. I'm going to put this thing out probably tomorrow. Great. Just to try to get it, as early as possible. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think what you're doing is great.
Thank you
I've had an absolutely amazing time talking to you.
It's fascinating.
I really appreciate you being willing to come on. I really love the perspective that you have. And I think that that you in particular are doing a great service to what is your passion. When you said you wanted to change the world, when you said these are my reasons for wanting to do things, a lot of people want to do things. I'm a progressive, and you see how they act. Yeah. I think you are doing great service to what's in your heart. And I hope you keep going with it.
Thank you so much for saying that. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
So fun. My first podcast too. So I feel it's pretty brother.
Awesome. My second third episode. So I mean, me and you aren't that far apart. Yeah, you know what I mean? Hey, share it with everyone you know. Let's get the word out there. And we are absolutely going to schedule another one between you and I.
Yeah,
and Lebo, I'm calling you out.
Yeah, let's do it, Lebo.
When you're in DC, holla at your boy. Let me know.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll talk again soon.